There we go. By the way, we probably won't have the time to go through all of those features in one go, but we'll see how far we can go. And please ask if you have any doubts or something is unclear, because this place is ideal to get answers for those questions.
Well, also one thing to make clear is that the presentation that Eduardo did, we're going to share it afterwards. The what is it called?
The PowerPoint, yeah.
Not the PDF, the PowerPoint. Yeah, that's it.
So for this Coliseum, the Ring on the Fly was usable just about the end of right before this Coliseum was released, and that was this Coliseum released in 2019 October, I think. So we had about 2 months before I was already starting using it, but it was very far from what it is today. But yeah, so since then I've been able to use it more, and it also helped me use some motion capture for everything that was done after the release of this Coliseum. So pretty much the animations that were done for the final cut. For those that know, it's basically some extra content that was done afterwards. And those animations, we were able to use motion capture to go faster, but also to make a bit more and give more believability into the motion. There was a lot of work to be done on Disco, and so I couldn't go that fast and spend that much time on all of the animations, and using motion capture helped a lot, combined with Rococo's retargeting add-on and Rig on the Fly. It kind of all works super well together.
Yeah, Rig on the Fly is especially good for cleaning up stuff from motion capture, especially for feet that are sliding, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So Soul Punisher is asking about rig states. I do believe this is one of the best features about Rig on the Fly. So perhaps, Eduardo, you want to go through a bit of the basics, and then once you do, head to the rig state for today.
Sounds good. So let's see. I have... Right. Let's load in the night. Let's do it like this. And getting the keys inside. There we go. Rig on the Fly. Let's close everything up until there. And let's see. We're gonna bake everything. And remove the wireframe as well. It's a bit difficult to see the controllers right now, and I have planned to change those. But what you can currently do for this is you have those controller shapes in there when you're making changing your rig. Rig on the Fly adds those controller shapes. You can make edits to them. So just very quickly, this we can it's kind of mesh, so it should be yes. And right now, there we go, we have those circles everywhere, and maybe it's a bit easier now to follow what's happening. So let's see, right now this mesh is Maybe it's not the best. Let me try with another one. We have the cube person. This one is cleaner. Yeah, easier to understand. And it comes with an animation already. So let's start with the Armature tools. So we can see that we have the basic setup. Just leaving the mouse on any button, you will have a quick description of what it does. Ideally, it's enough, but we will be adding more to the documentation once we finish a bit more the Rig on the Fly 2.0. But right now this says that it adds the controller shapes to all bones that are not using one, and it does so for all those that are invisible layers. And then it assigns those bones a left or right. It puts them in the left or right bone group, depending on how if their naming ends in a left or right. Let me say this again. If they have a left or side suffix. So a side suffix would be right there. It says left arm shoulder. So right now this wouldn't work with the basic setup. So if I do this, oh no, it does. So if I do basic setup, it understands which controllers are on the right, which are on the left, and it assigns them to the right bone group. And this is pretty much all it does, the basic setup. It just adds those controller shapes so that it's a bit easier to see how things work. Alright, then quickly now that we have those controller shapes, I'm gonna go up there and we have the controller shape settings. This only has one function for now, which is to change the size of those controller shapes. And just pressing more or minus, you would change this. I usually keep them pretty low, pretty small. And what I do is under the Armature tab, I keep them in front because otherwise they end up hidden by the mesh. Alright, we also have this mirror toggle, which I think will not... Yes, it does work. So since this bone, let's see, this bone is the left arm, and it has an opposite controller of the same name, but just with R in front. This script understands that there's a mirrored bone, and so what it will do is when you scale it, it scales the mirrored bone as well. If you turn it off, it only turns the selected ones. And if you want them back to the same size, I think you can just leave the mirror on, and yeah, it applies the controller shape size so that is the same for for both sides. So this is all the controller shape settings do. Next up, right there we have this ray that is coming from Maya, and has those bone orientations that are a bit unusual for Blender. So Blender likes it when those bones, you have the tail, which is this part. It's also the pivot of your bone, and you have the tail. And so what happens is, if I can show the axes and put them, I'll leave it here for now. Maybe a simpler version of it. There we go. So we can see that Blender's bones, the y-axis always points to the head. So you can move this around and you will see that the y-axis stays pointing to the head. And as for the x and z axis, those are moved around by the roll. And so what happens is, in some instance, you probably want those axes to be different than what Blender likes. Usually what Blender likes is that the y-axis points to the child, and so you would have something closer to this for the bones. But if you make those changes, now the animation is all messed up. So we need to keep those bone orientation intact when we make those changes to the rig, and that's where we have the Orient visible button that comes in. And what it does is we pretty much took the, let's see if I can get an FBX from somewhere there. It pretty much does this, the automatic bone orientation, but it recreates the hierarchy that we have here, and it's kind of on top of this current hierarchy, but it orients the bones appropriately, and so you end up with, quickly move those to the right to a good layer. And if you press Orient visible, now you have the bones that have their y-axis points to the child, and your animation is intact.
Okay, can you do a little recap of everything you did so far? So essentially, you did the basic rig, which came from Maya, so the bones were pointing the wrong direction. Right. Then you created a new rig, which is the rig on the fly rig, and now it's pointing to the correct rotation to work with Blender. Is that correct?
Yes. So the main reason we want this is because of the IK constraint. I think it's the only one that has this requirement where the y-axis is used to point to the IK target. But you can find your original rig. So you have it here, right there you have root on its own, and you have the other version of the rig, which is, I'm not sure if we can select hierarchy, but this one has the Orient prefix, and this is just a recreation, like a duplicate of the initial rig, but it drives the other rig. So you can find it in this other layer, and the reason why it's in this layer is because of the layer settings. So under the layer settings we have three categories. The base bones, which are usually the ones that you are going to move around. The hidden controllers are the ones that you probably shouldn't touch when you're animating. Those are the ones that were mentioned when I was in the presentation, when I was applying the distribute rotation, for example. This is on this layer that they were thrown in. And then you have the unoriented bones. This is only for when you're using the Orient visible button. This is the layer that will be sent to. And so if we click on this layer, all those bones are the original bones from the rig. But you can't move them. And that is because they have constraints. And they are constrained to the Orient version of those bones on the Orient rig. And it looks like this currently because I don't have the shapes on my armature, but if I turn it back on, there we go, we have the shapes. I'm gonna remove the axes for now, and we're gonna make those smaller. There we go. I think there were some questions. Let's see. ARP's retarget functionality with some anim layers. So unfortunately, I don't know about ARP. But for animation cleanup, rig on the fly is very, very useful. But you have to be a bit careful with how you do this. Whenever, so let's see quickly. Yeah, this idea is that, and whenever you do edits to an animation, you would want it to be done using the DNLA. If I can remove, let's see if I can remove this. Shouldn't be it. Yes. This shouldn't be there. Not sure why it stays. Let's keep the only selected on. So now we have this clip. Let's rename it walk. There. And usually what happens is you have this underlying motion, and you would want to add some variation to this. So you add a new action and you want it to be with the add blending. And now if I do this, add key, and this is just to keep it to have at least one point where it's clean. And then we're going to take those, move this head, I think this is badly skinned. Yes, right. There we go. So we have some edits to this motion. The thing is, when you are going to make any changes to your rig, it doesn't really do well with the blending being in add. So what happens is, at least what I do is I take everything and bake. So I go animation, bake action, and probably overwrite. You don't have to click this one, but if you overwrite it, it kind of bakes the motion on the current action, and so usually you won't really go back to this. So you can just override this action, it removes the add and turns it into a replace, and you keep the motion, but now it's a replace.
So just to be clear, right now we're baking the action on the new animation, which is called action. We're not actually changing the original animation that was called walk.
Yeah, that's right. So if you go into walk, press tab on this clip, you will see that the head doesn't turn. But there, when it's the action, the one that was baked, this is what you find. You still have the head turning. We will. I'll show it a bit more after we go a bit lower. But right now we have this rig that has been oriented. And so if you want to get rid of everything that was done with the rig on the fly, you kind of want to reset, you have the bake rig button. And this, what it does is it's going to go through all the animations that this rig has on its NLA. So, and and also the current action. And so if you have a bunch of actions that you're working on, and you want them all to be changed by rig on the fly, you need to have those under your NLA, and the baking function for rig on the fly is going to go through each of those actions, bring them up, bake the motion, go to the next one, bake it, go to the next one, and then it's going to remove all traces of rig on the fly. So right now, if I press the bake rig button, it's going to get rid of the Orient visible that I had going. So if I do this, I have those bones back. And my motion isn't changed in any way. Let's see if we have, let's keep the one where you have the head turning. This was done while we had the Orient controls. Let's bake it down. And like the shapes, you can see that no motion was kept and was transferred to the original rig or original hierarchy. All right. Let's see. But when you do this, you need to be a bit careful because, for example, if I remove this action from the active ones, and now I bake my rig. If I go back and take my action again, it doesn't have this this head turn, and you will also find it that it has all the animation on it is actually the ones from the Orient bones, and since they aren't any in this rig anymore, there's no animation to be played on. So this is where you need to be a bit careful what you're doing with your actions. If you want
could you repeat that, because I didn't really follow. How come it didn't change?
So the reason it didn't change was I baked everything while after removing this action. So
so it wasn't in the current action and wasn't in the NLA, so it didn't get baked.
That's it.
Okay, so this is a usual mistake that someone can do if he's not careful.
Mm-hmm. So what can happen is you're working on a bunch of different animations or different clips for a game. You've made the walk, you made the jump, and you've put it on the side. You press this to keep it in your file, but you removed it because you don't want it to clutter. And for some reason you just baked everything and you want to take this action back. You were like, oh, I forgot to add this to my NLA to export it, for example. Well, suddenly this is what you get. Doesn't quite work anymore. You don't have the head turning anymore. And this is one of the common pitfalls of this. So usually when you're working with editing animations and using the NLA, this is something that can happen. You should try to be careful with it. But yeah, let's try to continue a bit, make some progress, because we only talked about like 4 things, I think. We have the proxy, which I mentioned a bit during the presentation, but this, as it says, it duplicates the armature that comes from somewhere else. So for example, if I link this and I'm gonna go, let's see, what was it? Yes. So for example, we have Bakir right there, and he has been linked. This means that any changes done in the original file will be applied to this character. But that's not ideal when you want to animate it. So what you need to do is make it a library override. So you can select it, click on library override, make and selected and content. That's one way to do it, or otherwise you can go under object and you have library override here. Let's see what happened. There. So right now you can go into pose mode with it, and you can move your mesh around, and you can click on your on the mesh, you can move it around, but you can't go into edit mode. And it's the same for the rig. The thing is, for rig on the fly to work, it needs to go into edit mode, add some new controllers, and bake it all. Unfortunately, when it comes when it's linked, you can't do that. So this is where you use the proxy button. It's similar to the Orient visible, but it actually creates another object. So let's see, on the right we have, let's see this. This is like your armature, and if you press the proxy, you have the armature copy, and this is going to drive all the bones from this one up there, the one that was linked, simply because it has now some, let's see, it has some, oh, that's not right. It has some constraints, and with those constraints it pretty much replicated the whole rig, but you don't hide them again, but you won't be let's see, you won't be animating the proxy itself, you would be animating the copy. Fortunately, it only has a different name for the object, but all the bones are the same. So once you're done with this, you will be able to share this animation, this action, to the proxy. But this, now that it's copied and it's in the scene and it's not linked, you can go into edit mode for this copy and use all the functionalities of rig on the fly. That reminds me, we have some things that needs to be improved on there, because, for example, right now you can, let's see if there's no bake happening. Yeah. So unfortunately, for example, right now we have the bake button, which is just not clickable, and it should be so that you can remove all the action that was done and put it on the linked armature. Also, if you click on your linked armature, you can see that the proxy button comes up. This means that you can press the proxy button if you click on an armature that isn't a linked one. Suddenly the proxy button is not available, and that's just because, since it's not linked, there's no reason to use the proxy button on it. And that's a functionality that we want to add to more buttons in rig on the fly, so that it's easier to not mess up. So there's still work to be done for this. I think I'm gonna just remove all of that. I don't have much experience with using proxies or linked armature, so if you have any feedback on it, I would be very grateful. Just gonna remove both. There we go. we're back with our cube guy. All right. Next up we have, so I talked about the proxy, the Orient visible. Then we have a simple add bone. As it's described, it adds a bone that acts just as an extra. It has the kind of rig on the fly tag to it, so it gets removed when you bake. But it's just a bone that says extra, and you can find it. So under hierarchy, you have the root, and it's on the same level as the root. And you can use it for all kinds of purposes if you want it to act as a locator. I found myself not using it much, but yeah, it's there. And if you want to remove it, that's just to remove the center of mass. I guess this is the easiest way. You just go back to edit and delete it. Now we have the root motion. That's an interesting one. So let's see. I have this. Remove the extra. And I want this action. Okay, so there we're in the walk. And what happens is the character walks in place. That's usually what you would want. Sorry. Usually what you would want for a character that has an animation loop. But sometimes you want this. What happens is you probably want or have this character moving around. So if I put this there, somewhere over here, I'm gonna put those controllers on vector because that's a bit easier to see here. Currently the curve is like this. You have this behavior with V vector. It's gonna make it linear. And let's see, this is about right. There's minimal sliding. But what happened is this motion is not on any bone, it's on the armature object itself. This is why it says object transforms. And what happens is a lot of the time, if you want to make changes to your character, so for example, you want this character to walk in another direction. You would turn it around, and when you play, it continues to go to this other way. And so if you want to play around with the motion itself of the object, it's a bit easier to do that under its bones. It's it's not that easy to explain right now, but what ends up happening is you want, let me remove the rotations there. So yeah, this is what you want to avoid, and then suddenly what you need to do is, instead of having it go this way, you would want it to move there. And there are other ways to do this that are a bit easier when it's done at the bone level. But also a bunch of the functionalities for rig on the fly is only on bones. So it's going to be easier to do that. Also, if you do any, it's going to come up later, but under space switching, if you want to put any controller under wall space, it isn't really wall space. It's going to be the armature object space. And so if you have your armature moving, it's going to mess up all these curves. That's where the root motion comes in. So it's going to take the armature object's motion, and it's going to transfer it to a bone inside. It's been a while since I've used it, so I'm not sure if it's still gonna work. It seems there's an issue. We're still with the walk. This is part of the walk. Let me up and root motion. Okay, unfortunately there's something that it's been a long time since I've used it. I need to revisit it.
Yeah, so some features of Rig on the Fly need to be updated. It's still a work in progress. I believe you're using the alpha version 2, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's still a few things we need to iron out before it's fully released.
Yeah. So I guess this is something that I should prioritize because it's pretty important.
Yeah,
and
so
yeah, I guess I should. This is fine. And if I do remove root motion, what did they do? Oof. Okay. So we still have the object transform. And it's still moving. I didn't have smart frames on. Yeah, this is gonna require a lot more investigating.
Yeah, I think now is not the time to try to debug Rig on the Fly. But Philo Vivero is asking essentially if the idea is to take the transform from the armature and then baking it inside the root motion bone.
Yes.
Or the root of
that's
the
it.
Yeah.
So normally the script, what it does is it's going to look at the transforms on the armature object, and it's just going to copy those points to a new controller that has been added, and then it's going to remove those keys on the armature transforms, object transforms. I just want to check one thing. If I bake of this, for example, if I, where was it? Animation. Oh. There. It baked the action. Got this. Alright, current action. This seems all good. It's gonna be object. And we have this. And quickly up. You know what, there. And if I do with motion, no, still not. Fine. Let's see. I had also as a rule, if we have a full control over the animation, never move the rig object, only move the bones so that the space switching will work there. Yes, that's the ideal case, because a lot of the time when you're using space switching, you want to understand what the curves are doing, and if you have the underlying object, the armature object, moving around in the space, those curves suddenly don't mean much because it's gonna combine both motion. All right, next up we have the. Let me remove all of this mess. It's gonna be easier like that. There we go. Next up we have the center of mass. So this one it doesn't change much of the rig, but it gives a visual indicator of kind of the center of different bones. So right now I have think it's the 11 bones that I need, yeah. Those are the usual 11 bones that you need to figure out the center of mass of a human. And if you click on the center of mass, it adds this new controller. And this one is probably the only one that has a special property to it. And what it does is you can see that it moves around with the rest of the rig, and it's not that smooth. What happens is its location depends on the location of other parts of each bone that was selected. And here you can have it so that right now the weight is 100% for all of them. If I move this bit there, you can see that the neck is at 100%, etc. And this pretty much takes all this information and tries to be in the middle depending on the weighting. So if I put the weighting very low, suddenly the controller goes down a bit because it's not attracted that much to the head bone. So if you've seen the courses on Animation Sherpa, he mentions the right values for this. I have them noted somewhere as well. There we go. And so, for example, we have for the head 7.3. For the spine one, this is the lower one, it's going to be 10.1, 35.8. This is the elbows, the lower arm. I think I messed up the one that I selected, but basically what happens is you're going to change all of this, and suddenly whenever you move your character around, this will act as a center of mass. It's one of those things that are really useful when you need it, but requires a bit more like handwork that you need to do yourself. It's so it acts as a bone. You can put it very low. I think you can turn it around, but you can't move it around because its location is limited to those bones. It's driven by those bones. I'm gonna leave it on for a while because it's gonna be useful a bit later. So this was the center of mass. You can remove it just by pressing this, and there it goes. But it doesn't change the armature behavior in any way. Alright, so those were everything under the Armature Tools tab. One last thing, and it's something that you will find for other tabs as well, is those controller shape settings. So this comes in handy if, let's see, I'm going out of this, I'm going to add an icosphere. And I'm going to say that, for example, extra bones, when I add them, I want them to use this shape. And go back to here, I press add bone, and there we go. We have an extra bone. Its name is extra 1, but it uses this shape. And what you can do is kind of prepare some presets in here. And whenever you're going to make changes to your rig, it's going to try to put the right shapes on your bones. And it does so for pretty much everything that is going to add some new bones, new controllers. For the center of mass, it's shortened to COM. You will be able to use it to move your character around, but this comes for with the space switching, and what you do is take the bone that you want to that you kind of want to parent to it, and what you need to do is use the parent to copy. And what this will do is you now have this new controller that was added, and it followed exactly the center of mass motion, but your hips is a child of it. So right now the hips don't follow the rotation. I'm going to talk about it a bit later. But the reason why it moves like this is because under relations, the inherit rotation is off. And I guess this is going to be pretty handy because it's the next tab. So right now we have, when we move the parent, the hips is a child of it, but it's not rotating. And usually when you're rig, you want this to be on so that it behaves how you'd expect. So if I turn it on, there we go. The thing is, when you do this, it changes the animation. So it's a bit difficult to explain with this. Let's see. Maybe I can do it for the arms. The arm doesn't have inherit rotation. If you turn it on, you saw that there was a slight shift. What happens is, since the torso moved, when it's on, when this is on, well, let's see, there's a bunch of things. I think everything is with rotations off, but rotation, right rotation, and yeah, this one. All right, that was a lot, but okay. This is what happens usually when you have the inherit rotation on. The thing is, now that I did that, you can see that the animation is a bit different. And this is because it plays exactly the same curves. So all of those, it plays them on those bones. But when you turn this off, it acts as if it didn't have any parent. And so suddenly, when there's a rotation happening, if the values are 0, it would stay on this pose. But now that it inherits the rotation here, let's say it's still 0, but it inherited the rotation from its parent, so it's in another pose. And so when you have something like this, let's put it back to how it was. This is where the rotation and scale tools comes in. What you can do is change it to on or off. So it basically turns this on or off, but it transfers the motion to those controllers, so you don't lose the motion that you had. So let's do this. It takes a bit of time to bake. There we go. Now when we click on it, we can see that inherit rotation is on. And if I move this, it turns around. Same for that. Yeah, exactly, sinodes. And sometimes it's useful to keep this inherit rotation off, and other times it's a pain. So with this, you can change it whenever you want, and you will not lose any motion. And it's the same for scale. So I think right now, yeah, inherit scale is turned off for all the bones. And there's a wide variety, but what this does is puts either in none or in full. If we so currently everything is off, I think, or it's inherit scale none. So if I scale, this is what you get. Now if I take everything, turn inherit scale on, suddenly when I'm going to scale up this, you can see that the whole character scales up and down. I think I'm gonna remove, yes, this. All right, and it does pretty much the same thing with rotation modes. So right now we have, let's see, by default in Blender, all bones animations are in quaternion. And I find it's pretty useful, but sometimes if you want to be very deliberate with the curves, quaternion is not the best for this. Quaternion is great to go from pose to pose. It kind of doesn't get affected by gimbal lock, but you don't, when you're working with a low amount of keys, you can get some weird rotations happening. And this is where you would be able to change it without changing the motion. And you have all those different rotation modes that you can switch to, and it works exactly the same. So it's going to switch all the bones that you select. If I only select the arm, turn this into another rotation mode. I think it's done. Yes, now it's in ZXY. And you can see, let's remove this. What happens is you have both the quaternion rotations here and the Euler ones. I think that's something that I should probably fix so that you don't get confused. But let's see if I can, yes, there. I can select this, so this is the X rotation. If I move this around, turns around the X-axis. And I still have the, let's see, the quaternion rotation value is there, but they're not used anymore because we're not in quaternion. I could go back and now it's using this, but usually you wouldn't want it to work this way. You would want to make the change through rig on the fly. It's a bit safer, and I'm gonna make it so that it removes all the channels that don't impact the animation. So I'll be making changes to this. But that's how rotation mode works. You just select the bones you want to change the rotation mode, and then select the rotation mode that you want. Last of this tab, it's gonna be the distribute rotation. And so this one has, it's pretty nifty. It has, what it does, it distributes the rotation starting from the selected bone, and it goes up the hierarchy. So right there, let's see the rotation. Yes, it says select the bone down the hierarchy depending on the chain length. So it's gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it will not impact this bone, but when I'm going to turn this head, it's gonna slightly turn everything as if I was selecting everything and moving it with individual origin turned on. So if I do this, distribute, did I mess this up? There we go. So it's there, it's changed shape, it's a hexagon now, and the other contours are hidden. But now you can turn around the character, and it's going to be like, kind of distributing the rotation down the chain. And to remove this and to bake back to your to your action, you're going to press the apply button, and this is going to make you go back to this. So the reason to use the distribute rotation is kind of to simplify your array while you're making the main poses. I've been using it usually for characters that have a longer spine, and I don't want to be turning everything, selecting them all to turn them. And so if I just set up this correctly, then I can just move the torso, and it's going to move the spine bones. And what you can do as well is turn this off, the inherit rotation, and distribute the rotation like this, which is pretty nice. So if I do it for the head as well, so now let's see if I turn this off as well. So now the head and the torso don't inherit the rotation of their parent. I can move this, that, and the head stays looking in the same direction. But it distributes the rotation down the hierarchy. And if I want to go back, just apply and up. Do I have the right one? Yep. I need to be careful with how I put things back. There we go. Also, it has a little fail safe, where if you're going with too many bone length, for example, it will give you an error message saying there's not enough parents. And you only need to select the bone that you selected when you press the distribute button. So when I press distribute, it made this new bone that has the rotation distribution prefix. And you just need to press this one, then apply. And then you have it back how it was. And here we have the controller shape setting for the distribute. And you can select anything. I'm gonna quickly show it because this one might need a different shape. Let's put this for some reason. Take that. And now it appears I haven't set this up correctly. I will be making a note of that. But yeah, good thing to debug. Right, so we still have our block. Remove this for now. Remove restore child. Yep, this has been impacted by. Let's see, where should this go? I messed things up a bit. Since I had the distribute affect the bones, the bone that was controlling the hips, it kind of messed it up, And now I have something that is not working. So when things are messed up like this, baking kind of resets everything. So it's really useful to just keep this in mind. And I haven't lost any motion. Do have a slight, I think there's a slight jump there. Just gonna remove. There we go, it's a bit smoother. I must have moved something around at some point. Alright, so we went over the rotation and scale tools. Now we have the IK and FK switch. This is when we want to turn on Orient visible, because it's the IK the constraint will simply not work without the Y axis pointing to the child. So just as an example, I'm gonna try to turn on the IK on the left hand, and it's gonna be a chain of 2 since it's this middle bone and this base bone. It's gonna be the hand, and we're gonna leave the stretch type to none. I do this, and there has been a slight change to the motion. I go back to it, and unless something changed, usually that's not how. Ah, right. So something changed a bit, and what happened is something that is done for when clicking the IK. Not the middle bone, but the one that points to the IK, the last one of the chain. What happens is this script takes the head of this bone, and it snaps it to the target. The target is going to be, for this example, it's the hand. This is for stretching purposes. It scales better, it behaves better. But what happened is it changed the rig in a way that we don't want. So right now the y-axis of this arm has been changed, and if we go back, if we remove the, let's go back to the animation there, to FK, I guess it's been baked down, but we suddenly have this bone that its axis was changed, and this is something we want to avoid. And so this is where you would orient visible to, let's see if I can go back, yes, far enough. Orient visible, and let's take everything, scale it down a bit, and turning back on the IK. And this time there hasn't been any shift in the animation when I turned it on. And currently this is acting in IK, but it still has the animation that it had before. When you leave the pull vector boolean on, it creates this pull vector. IK is probably the one that is the most finicky because of how it works. It has a bunch of different things that makes it that it might change a bit the motion. What happens is you can have rotations in your IK chain. So right now I'm going under the layers that are usually hidden. This is where those FK controllers has been sent to. And depending on how they are moved, they affect the final position that you have on your arm. And it can be useful, but it can also make it more difficult to not lose motion. So it's useful, for example, if you want, let me remove this FK, and I'm going to, let's see if I can do a longer chain. So this is going to go up the arm and down the spine of it. Suddenly you have stuff that are going pretty wrong. Yeah, guess it's the pole vector that can cause issues. This is a lot better. So you have this IK with the chain length of 5, and this is the behavior that you end up getting. And what can happen is you would want those middle controllers to be visible so that you can change them while they are still in IK, and you will be able to change the pose, push it, pull it, however you want. Just going to turn back to it. But yeah, this also, if the hierarchy isn't as high as goes up as high as the chain length, it will just come up with a message. But that's pretty much it. And usually if you go with more than 2, the pole vector is kind of not ideal. Also in general, without the pole vector, you would not get any changes to the motion. It's the pole vector itself kind of messes up some things if not everything in your rig is clean and straight with the axis looking correctly at the correct angles and all of this. We also have right there the stretch types. So this is pretty nice for stylized animations. We have 3 versions of this. We have the location, which if I turn it on, suddenly you have, let me keep the pole vector. Suddenly you have the IK, but you can also go further than the length of the arm, and it will stretch only the position of those bones. What happens is you actually have a new arm, you have a copy of the arm rig, and those are the ones that get scaled, and this Orient arm bone only copies the location of this new IK stretch as a stretch chain. And so this IK stretch chain is the one being affected by the IK. You can find it right away. If you find here, you find the IK here. Also, ring on the fly constraints end up with this ROTF suffix. It's a way for the rig to understand, or for bring on the fly to understand which constraints need to be removed when you're baking everything, but it's also a good way to figure out where do those constraints come from. So right there, right now we're in IK stretch type location, and this is what happens. So you have your initial chain that is copying the location of the stretch one. And this is how we get just the stretch location. If you go to, let's go back a bit there, break this down. If we go to scale now, it stretches only on the y-axis. And we see that there's some behavior that we don't really want. I guess that's something that needs to be checked a bit. I think it has to do with, let me see. this is correct.
Are you inheriting the scale in the hands, maybe?
It is, and that's probably not what you want, so let's see how it goes. It should do this by default, but let me turn it off for now. I think I pressed the wrong one, scale. Nope, it's still shearing. It's curious. Inherit rotation and scale none. Thank you, Synodes. So if you get errors with it, not sure what kind of errors did you encounter, or what kind of errors do you have in mind? Was this? Yeah, this is a bit not what we want. Does it work the same way on other? Let me check quickly. Yes, it does the same. It's been a while since I've used those. Something might have changed with the different Blender updates, or something was just off with how I was doing things. But yeah, ideally, what happens if you descale, it will scale in the y-axis the chain. So that appeared another time. I would need to reproduce it later. Okay. Yeah, if you get errors like this, coming to Discord and asking for help, we'll find a solution. Usually, what happens is you shouldn't be moving stuff around too much for it to work. So it's simply just turning on IK, moving things around. Now everything is a bit off. Huh. You know what? I think it has to do with... No. Doesn't have to do with this. Ah, right. So I guess this is a kind of a limitation with the... it actually has to do with the Orient. So the reason why it's behaving wrongly is because the Orient isn't getting... So this is the normal bone, so the base one, this is the Orient version. And what happens is, if I go into scale, I take this, this should be inherit none. Alright, and now I take this Orient bone, scale it, and it doesn't stretch the hand anymore, but the rest is still getting everything. So let's see, just a quick test. I'm going to take everything in the Orient, the base rig, and we're gonna turn off inherit rotation by holding Alt, selecting all the bones that you want, pressing Alt. It will apply any changes to all the selected bones. So if I do this, yes, this is what happened. It's not great, but yeah, this is gonna be the reason why it's not working, is probably most likely because of this. When you're using the Orient functionality, it has some limitations, and it's kind of a mess to deal with. It requires a lot of testing and to find those edge cases. All right. Let's see.
Coming back to the error that SideGnomes mentioned, if you have an error while you're baking something, what's the best way to return to a working animation?
I think that would be the bake rig. It's usually the easiest one. So you would want to go back to a state where your animation isn't messed up, and baking the rig down through Armature tools or the rig state, you can find it as well here. It's exactly the same button, and this should reset your rig, and you can go back to adding all your controls. And if you get errors even there, there are ways to clean things up. So when you bake the rig, it should remove anything that has to do with the rig state. It's something that has that is written on the Armature object. It's kind of a script-only thing. But with rig on the fly, we add a property to your Armature object, which is called the rig state, and there's a bunch of other things like those. And this get completely cleaned up when you click the bake rig, and you will usually find all your bones are put back to the first layer when you bake rig. And it's just a question of figuring out which are the ones that are still there that you need to remove. Usually they should have been removed just by the bake rig function. If not, you should be able to find them under your hierarchy, and you can remove them by hand. I think that would be the way to go. But yeah, usually bake rig kind of resets everything in general. It should work. But yeah, just in case, you can go back into your hierarchy, delete things around. Alright, this was the IK efficacy switch. We're about halfway, I think. But yeah, this one is probably one of the more interesting ones. The IK is pretty good, but it has those limitations with what was mentioned for when it's used with the Orient rig or something like this. It can be a bit messy. There's some things that are the requirement of the y-axis pointing to the IK target can be also, or the pole target as well, just can shift the animation around, so it's not as precise as other space switches. But yeah, right now the space switch, it has currently 4 categories. We have the make world, which is very simply, you're gonna see this. So this hand, for example, the blue one there, it moves around in the space. But if you go under location, you can see that there's very minute location position happening. And if you go up there in the item transforms, you can see that it kind of just doesn't move around. And if you go into make world, what happens is it's gonna transfer the motion to another bone that is going to be created, that will be called world orient left arm wrist. And this one will drive the hand bone that was there before, but it's not right now. This hand controller is in world space, so suddenly as you go around, you can see the location values are moving up and down, and those values are aligned with your scene space. So Z is up, Y is the depth, and x are the sides. And so if you set the, select all with L. If you select the x values, you will see that suddenly it goes exactly along the axis, the x-axis, same for y, etc. And your hand is not constrained to its hierarchy anymore. You can find it here, right next to the root. It's at the very base of your armature. So it doesn't have any parent, and its location values are aligned. The rotation values as well are also aligned. So if you press rotate, reset the rotations with Alt R, this is what you get. To reset the position as well, it will reset in the center of the scene. And this can be pretty useful for, I guess, for tweening your animation, making sure that the arc is correct, even if you don't care about the position of the parent. Something that is pretty nifty, and you might let's see, remove world. You might recognize this from Richard Lico's presentations, is this combined. So with this now you have everything moves on its own. And if you combine this with the simple constraints that I'm gonna go a bit more over a bit later, suddenly you're going to get this behavior. And it's a bit similar to what you have if we put the feet in FK. There we go. You can get this kind of IK chain going up the spine. And so you can exaggerate, let's see, the Z location, you can find it there. So let's play it while we deform. And now you can see that the Z value is exaggerated. You can take it for a bunch of them. Let's see if we, yeah, that's not a great way to do that. You take this, kind of move it up, this, same, you exaggerate both, and suddenly this is what you can get. Or if you want to limit the value, you can just take everything up to a certain point and there, you flattened it out.
Flattening out animations is actually really nice when, for example, your character is going to put his feet on the ground or his hands on a wall, and you don't want the feet or the hands to clip through that thing. And since it's going to be a world space, you can flatten it out and you'll be sure it won't go through.
Exactly. So it can be very useful for this, and that's where you would want those values to not be affected by the armature object's motion, as we discussed before. Let's see how far. Yeah, let's just remove those simple constraints. There we go. So there was a slight shift into the pose. This is because of how the simple constraints functions, but I'm going to go over it a bit more afterwards. So we were still in the world space. After making it world space, there's not much else to do with it. Simply remove it. It's going to bake down the motion. So you can select all the ones, all the world, yeah, all the world controllers, and you will see that this button only comes up if a world controller is selected. And if you have a non-world controller that is selected, you only have the make world option. And when you have both, you only have the remove world. This is just so that you don't make world a bone that is already in world space. And this also makes it so that there's no reason to try to remove world to something that wasn't put in world space to begin with. But what you can do is select everything, remove world, and it will only remove the world controllers that are selected. And so everything now has been put back to its usual behavior. And yeah, it was all done in a few clicks. Yes, the recording will be shared. So no worries, you can leave. We will be uploading the recording later.
To be fair, we've been here for about 2 hours, so yeah, I think although if you can't go through everything, maybe you can go through a few things and wrap up.
Yeah, should we try to finish up the space switching, or should we call it a day now?
Yeah, I think you can finish the space switching. This way you finish per section.
Well, then let's quickly go over the rig states, because it's pretty nifty. Let's go with this. So the way it works, rig on the fly records every changes that was done through rig on the fly. It records it on the Armature object. And so if we put everything like this, all those controllers in IK. Thank you, Filovino. So now everything, all those controllers were put in IK, and we can actually save this state. Let me see. We have also, let's put some rotation distribution as well. Rotation distribute 3. This seems fine, and this, I guess it's 3 as well. We both gonna put them inherit rotation off. All right. So we have this, which is a pretty solid posable rig as it is. And what happens with the rig state is it recorded all of those steps in a hidden property. And when you press save, you will be able to choose where you want to save it. So it comes with this, how do you call those? The .rs
extensions.
Yeah, this extension, the RS stands for rig state. You can rename it however you want. So let's put QPerson posing. So right now this has been saved. You can find it again when you go for folder under folder path. I've put it under rig stage. That's just how I did it. And you don't have specifically to click here, because you might have a bunch of rig states there. But if you can click on it or not. The thing is, the important thing is to load the file path, just the folder itself. So if I do this, probably nothing happened yet. You have to move your cursor on your mouse over this window for it to update. But once you do this, you have this QPerson posing rig state that is there. And if we, for example, need to remove everything, we bake it all, and we want to bring this up again. So now that we've baked it, everything is back to how it was. But we want to bring this rig state that we had right before. You just click on the cube person posing that has been loaded. It's gonna take a while to go through each step, and you can find that there has been an error at some point, but you should check if everything is okay. So we saw that there's a little issue with the hand. Not quite sure what happened there, but otherwise the behavior is the same as what we had, but it has loaded it up all in one go. And what happened is you can have a bunch of different states. So let me remove those, just the hands. I'm gonna remove those IK. And let's see, is there anything interesting to do? This, well, not specifically. Oh,
you can try to add a center of mass or something.
Right, I can. So for center of mass, let's go back to here. We want this, those two, this, here, there, 9, 10, 11, there. Add my center of mass. Let's put it down a bit, and we can even set its properties however we want. So this one is correct. I'm gonna put it with a few of the numbers that I have here. Let's see. I'll try to go quick. 5. Don't have to go further than this, but yeah. And when I save this, let's mention a center of mass, and we keep the posing. Let's see. Right, now we added a new rig state to the folder. You can reload it quickly with this, or find it again going over the folder path. I'm just going to click this, refreshed, and now you have the center of mass. And you have this other option under bake on load, which basically will press bake before it loads the rig state. So in some instances you might end up having issues if you just go from one state to another. Some parts of it will still be there where you don't want it, or it might mess up the rig state because something was done out of order. So if you leave this on, it will bake everything before reloading the rig state. So remaking all those steps to bring up the rig. So I'm gonna leave this on, and right now I'm in this center of mass posing version, and I'm gonna go back to the person posing with the IK. So it's baking down everything, and it should have loaded up everything, but it doesn't seem to work. Let me try this again. Yeah, there is an issue with this. Wait, I think there wasn't any issue, my bad. I was just in the wrong layer. So I should try to load back the center of mass. Let's see. So let's move the center of mass there. And there we have the hands in FK, the feet in IK. We have the center of mass, which I could move. This is not how it should work. Yeah, there might be things to be fixed for this. But yeah, ideally it would reload. So right there, it did correctly put the right numbers here, but it didn't apply the driver that is needed for the center of mass to function correctly. So that's something I need to fix. But this is what it does. So it kind of picks everything up and reloads the rig state. So let's go back to the person posing. It's going to put the hands back up again and remove the center of mass. And there we go. So yeah, that was pretty quickly the rig states. And those are pretty useful to go from to just save states and reload them. I ended up not using them much yet, simply because it requires a bit of setup to be sure that this is a state I want to come back to. But yeah, and also it's been very easy to rebuild the rigs. But I found it that it would be something very useful to keep around. So there you go. That was the rig states. You have the single frame pose that uses the rig states, and this is, instead of doing the changes to all the actions that you have, it kind of sets it apart so that you can make your changes, the changes to your rig on this single frame. So it's a bit faster. Now we have to go to FK. It doesn't go through all the it only makes this single frame, and you can like pose differently. And when you apply the pose, it will go back to the state it was, the rig state it was before setting up the single frame pose. And this was really done for when you're working on a additive layer. That's kind of the only way to change how the rig behaves while in this additive animation action layer. But yeah, it's also like a way to quickly change your rig without waiting for it to bake everything every frame.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to reiterate that most of the times when you press a button in Ring of the Fly, what it's going to do is going to go through every single frame of your animations, all the animations that you have, and it's going to bake them. So the more animations you have, the slower it's going to be to make those changes to the rig. So in some cases, you might want to do it as in a single frame to make it a lot quicker.
Yeah, exactly.
And the reason we do bake every frame is so that the animation stays consistent no matter what changes you make to the rig. This is the whole point of Rig of the Fly.
Yeah, you want to be able to change how the rig behaves without impacting the motion. I guess there's something that might be good to mention before we end. It's the smart frames. So right now I have it turned off, but it's pretty useful to use when you're starting an animation from scratch. What it does is, let's see if we can keep just the main poses. So we have this, putting down the foot, there, putting down the other foot, and then the passing. All right. So now we have only those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keys. And if I put this on, it's when checked on, bakes only the frames where there are keys. If I make any changes to how the rig functions now, what is this? Remove keyframe point. Oh. Let me, there should appear that there's some issues. Yeah, I guess it's because there's still keyframes a bit everywhere. Let's mark those up and then clean things a bit. All right. I suspect this will be the fix. Yes. So what happened, the error that was coming up is it tries to only put the keyframes that it needs, but there were, and then it removes the one that were that are I forgot how you'd say this, but if there are more keyframes than what you want to bake down, so when now there was 5 of them, but we had actually on the FK arms, you had a bunch of other keyframes, and this is what was messing up the change. So right now, if I go back to this hand in FK, it only has keys here and there, turning it back to FK, and you can see that it only has keys, like the whole chain only has keys on those frames. And this is what Smart Frames does. It just bakes on the keys that exist, but nowhere else. And
so this might change slightly the motion.
Yeah, the
but
interpolation.
the key points are going to be stay.
Yeah, so the interpolation will change. So let's see quickly if I put this back in IK. And let's put it like that. And this is going to be pretty much a straight line between this pose and this pose. And if I put it in FK, it will actually curve around, because that's how it interpolates from this pose to that pose. With working in FK, this is how it interpolates from one to the other. But if you go in IK, this is how it interpolates. But the poses are the same. So usually if you start an animation, I would leave Smart Frames on for a while and just work like this until I feel confident and want to add more keyframes. Yeah.
So Filoviero, yeah. If you do not have Smart Frames on, it's going to put a keyframe on every single
So let's just
frame.
show it. That would be
Yep.
a good example. So we have it. I'm gonna put this back there, this back up here. And if I leave this off, FK, and now it's in FK, but it kept this interpolation. And this is pretty nice with another, so I would leave Smart Frames on for a bit and go under the keyframe tools and use the key range function. So we would go, this is 16, so you start at 17 and end at 27. And you're gonna key put keys, everything, everywhere between those two keyframes. If I press key range, now you have this. And you can stay in Smart Frame, bake everything. So now it's in FK, but you still get the interpolation from IK. And so this is just quickly for the keyframe tools. This is pretty useful for exactly this. We will go over it in another live stream, I think. But yeah, that's another tool that works pretty well with the rest. All right, hopefully
Yes,
with this you will be able also to understand the rest of it, and it served as a base for the next animations that you're going to do.
Yeah, I think with this we're gonna wrap it up. Hopefully, we're gonna send the recording soon after, maybe in a few days, and then for the next live stream we'll do another what's it called, another Google form to see when would be the best time, I think. And if you have any questions, make sure to ask them in the chat, especially if you find bugs. It's really important that you put the full error message and explain how to reproduce it so that we can try to fix whatever problem it is. And I'm sure we're gonna rewatch this video and see the things that came up.
Yeah. And sometimes the error can be very hidden or can be very unique to your scene. So in some cases, if you can, it can be good to send the file so that I can look into it and try to figure out what exactly is happening. But yeah, that should be it. I'll stop the recording for now, and I guess we're gonna be just saying goodbye.